3 alphas, 1 omega, a forced bond that failed. What came after the failure was something none of us had words for. My name is Caspian Voss. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not someone things happen for. I am someone things happen to. That's not self-pity. That's just the arithmetic of my life tallied up over 22 years and laid out honest. I'm an Omega, second generation unbonded, which in our world is the kind of detail that follows you like a bad smell. My father was Omega too, and he spent his whole life trying to outrun what that meant in a society that treated Omegas like promissory notes, valuable only in terms of what you could eventually be exchanged for. He died when I was 14. Cardiac failure, the records said. Exhaustion, I knew. There's a difference between the two, and only people who have watched someone run out of fight understand it. After that, I had my grandmother for 2 years, then I had no one. By 17, I was working 2 jobs in Havern City, a mid-sized industrial port on the northern coastline where the winters come in like something personal, like the cold has a grievance with you specifically. I worked days at a shipping warehouse and nights at a copy center that smelled like warm toner and someone else's deadlines. I ate rice and canned soup. I slept 6 hours when I was lucky. I did not complain, because complaining requires the belief that someone is listening. Here is the thing about debt in our world, in the Omega Alpha hierarchy that still runs beneath the surface of modern pack law like old plumbing, cracked and leaking. It compounds, not just financially, socially. An unclaimed Omega in arrears to a licensed pack creditor is not a person with a loan. They are a liability with a pulse. My grandmother had borrowed from the Havern Pack Credit Union, a pack-affiliated lending institution that operated under pack law rather than civil law, which meant the terms were not negotiable. The interest was not regulated, and the recourse available to me, a non-pack member Omega with no alpha sponsor, was essentially decorative. By the time I turned 22, the debt had grown to a number I could not say aloud without my hands going cold. The credit union had sent 3 notices. Then they sent a pack enforcer to my apartment, not to threaten, that distinction matters to them legally, but to inform me that my debt had been purchased. Pack debt, when it reaches a threshold, can be acquired by a third party under something called a bond-adjacent claim. It's an old law, pre-reform. The reformers tried to have it struck down twice, and twice the Pack Council voted to retain it, because the Pack Council is largely composed of alphas and bond-adjacent claims overwhelmingly benefit alphas, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that. The enforcer was polite, that was somehow worse. Your debt obligation, he told me, standing in my doorway with his boots on my threshold and his eyes cataloging my apartment the way a person catalogs a property they're assessing, has been acquired by Rennick Cole. You'll be contacted within 72 hours regarding transition arrangements. He left before I could speak. If you are not subscribed yet now, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. Let's back to the story. I stood in my apartment for a long time after that. The copy center had given me a plant, a small succulent in a terracotta pot, as a thank you gift when I'd worked a 20-hour stretch during tax season. It sat on my windowsill in the gray northern light. I looked at it. I thought, I know what Rennick Cole is. Everyone in the Northern Territories knows what Rennick Cole is. He runs the Cole Meridian, which sounds like a corporation because it is one, and also like a pack structure because it's that too, and also like a private security firm, a logistics network, a political pressure apparatus, and depending on who you asked and how much they'd had to drink, possibly the closest thing to a sovereign entity operating inside pack-recognized borders since the consolidation treaties of 40 years ago. He is 31 years old. He is the only child of Aldrich Cole, who built the Meridian and then died the way powerful men often die, suddenly, under circumstances that raised questions no one with sense chose to ask aloud. Rennick took over at 26, and in 5 years had not only maintained his father's empire but had made it something his father could not have imagined. He is, by all accounts, an alpha in the most complete sense of the word. Not in the performative way, not the chest-puffing dominance display that lesser alphas use to compensate for insecurity. The real kind. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. I had never met him. I was terrified of him. And in 72 hours, I was apparently his. The contact came in 48, not 72. A message on my phone from an unregistered number, brief and precise, A car will be at your address at 7 a.m. Friday. Bring what matters, leave the rest. I read it 4 times. I thought about the succulent on the windowsill. I thought, does a plant count as something that matters? I decided it did. I wrapped it in a dish towel and put it in my bag. Friday morning, the car was there at 6:58. A dark vehicle, not ostentatious, clean. The driver was a beta woman named Sable who told me her name when I asked and nothing else, which I respected. She drove me north out of Havern City, into the region locals called the Shelf, a long, elevated plateau above the harbor where the old industrial families had built their compounds in the previous century, where the views were extraordinary and the gates were high, and the message implicit was that the distance between yourself and the rest of the city was not accidental. The coal compound sat at the end of a private road lined with bare winter trees, their branches interlocking overhead like the architecture of something that had grown together slowly and couldn't be separated anymore without damage. The compound itself was, I don't have better language for this, serious. Not imposing the way things are imposing when they want to intimidate you. Serious the way things are serious when they have nothing to prove. Sable led me inside without ceremony, through a hallway with high ceilings and practical lighting and artwork that looked chosen because someone actually liked it rather than because it projected a particular image, through a second hallway, to an office. He'll be with you in a few minutes, she said and left. The office was large. One wall was entirely windows overlooking the compound's rear grounds, still winter gray trees skeletal, a garden that in another season might be remarkable but in February was all structure and bone. A desk heavy and old, the kind that had been somewhere a long time. Bookshelves. An actual physical filing system in addition to the screens, which told me something. People who keep physical files don't fully trust anything they can't hold. There was a chair in front of the desk. I sat in it. I put my bag on my lap. I waited. The door opened. Rennick Cole walked in the way water moves. Without apparent effort, with complete intention, finding the path of least resistance not because it was easy, but because he'd already calculated which path that was before he entered the room. I'm going to try to describe this accurately without being dramatic about it, not what I expected. I expected presence. I got presence, yes, but not the crushing kind, not the kind that announces itself and requires you to reorganize your breathing. His presence was the kind that simply occupied space. Quietly, completely. The way a large stone occupies the bottom of a river, not demanding attention, but undeniably there, and everything in the current moves around it without being told to. He was tall, dark-haired, close-cut, a face that had been through something, not violence specifically, but weather, time, decision, lines at the corners of his eyes that were not from laughing, though I'd learn later that wasn't entirely true. He sat down across from me. He looked at me. Not at my file, not at his desk, at me, direct, patient. Caspian Voss, he said, not a question, he was confirming. Yes, I said. Do you know why I acquired your debt? I had been preparing for this question for 48 hours. I had prepared several answers ranging from controlled to carefully composed. What came out was, no. He nodded like that was the correct answer. Good. I was concerned someone might have told you something inaccurate, and I'd rather start from nothing than spend time correcting a wrong impression. He opened the file on his desk, physical, actual paper, which confirmed my earlier assessment, and looked at it for exactly the amount of time it takes someone who has already read something thoroughly to remind themselves of a specific detail. Your debt is 34,000 in pack currency equivalents. Your current income, working 2 positions, covers approximately $600 per month after living expenses. At that rate, without interest compounding, you'd retire the debt in approximately 4.5 years. With interest at the credit union's contracted rate, you would not retire it in your lifetime. He looked up. That's not a threat, that's mathematics. I know, I said. I'm going to offer you something, he continued. And I want to be clear before I do that you are under no legal obligation to accept it. Bond-adjacent claims grant me a creditor relationship, not a custodial one. What I'm about to propose is optional. I waited for like this video and subscribe this channel. Let's back to the story. Work for me directly. Not a labor contract, not a service arrangement. I have those structures and you don't fit them. I'm offering a position as my personal operations coordinator. Administrative, logistical, organizational work. The compound runs on information management and scheduling precision, and my current coordinator is leaving next month for reasons unrelated to employment quality. He paused. The position pays $1,200 a month, room and board included. Debt forgiveness accrues at a negotiated rate. In 2 years, your obligation is cleared entirely. The room was quiet. The winter garden outside the window was still and gray. Why? I asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A small adjustment, like a compass needle finding north. Because the credit union's practices are, he seemed to select his next word with care, something I find objectionable, and because acquiring your debt was the only legal mechanism available to me for disrupting their claim on you. He looked back at his file. And because your employment history indicates someone who works with unusual reliability under adverse conditions. That's useful to me. I sat with that, I looked at the window, I thought about the succulent in my bag. I brought a plant, I said. Is there somewhere I can put a plant? Rennick Cole looked at me for a moment, then he said, your room has a south-facing window. I said yes. In those first weeks, I learned the architecture of Rennick Cole's world by navigating it. The Cole Meridian compound housed approximately 30 permanent residents, a mix of pack-bonded families, senior staff and operational personnel, plus rotating security. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It ran with the kind of quiet efficiency that only happens when everyone who works there has been selected for competence rather than proximity to power. My role was real. I want to be clear about that because I was suspicious of it at first, waiting for the actual arrangement to reveal itself, waiting for the moment when what he'd said in the office turned out to be a frame around something else. It didn't. I managed schedules. I coordinated between department leads. I handled the information flow that kept a complicated operation from developing friction. I was good at it in the way that people who have spent years organizing their own survival are often good at organizational work, because scarcity teaches efficiency, and I had spent a long time with very little margin for error. Rennick was an unusual employer. He communicated in precise economical language. He never gave an instruction twice. He had high standards and he held them consistently for himself first, which made them easier to accept from him. When I made errors, and I made several in those early weeks, he corrected them without theater. This went to the wrong contact. Here's the correct one for future reference. Done, not weaponized, just information. I watched him in those weeks the way I watch everything I don't trust yet, carefully from a peripheral angle, collecting data points. He ate at the same time every morning real food, cooked in the compound kitchen by a beta named Goran who'd been with the Cole family since Rennick was a child, and who treated him with the particular affectionate irreverence of someone who had known you before you became important. He exercised before dawn. He read physical books, taken from the shelves in the office, and returned with small paper markers at the pages that mattered to him. He had a younger sister, Delphine, who called twice a week, and whose calls he always took regardless of what else was happening. He did not have a mate. He did not have anyone in that category as far as I could observe, which I observed because I am an Omega, and despite my best efforts, my instincts have always had their own research agenda. What I noticed, what I couldn't stop noticing, was this. He never treated me like a debt. He never referenced the claim, the money, the obligation. From the first day forward, I was simply his coordinator, with a job and a salary and a south-facing window for my plant, and the complicated legal circumstance that had brought me there might as well not have existed for how rarely it entered the space between us. That was the most disorienting thing of all. I had prepared myself for many versions of this arrangement. I had not prepared myself for the version where I was simply seen as a person. The first time Rennick Cole did something that broke my carefully constructed theory of who he was, it was over a scheduling conflict on a Thursday afternoon in my third week. I had made an error, not a small one. I had double-booked him, a meeting with the Northern Pack Council liaison and a private call with a legal team from the Eastern Seaboard, both at 2 p.m., both non-negotiable by the standards of the people requesting them. I had caught it at 11 a.m. and spent 40 minutes trying to resolve it before accepting that I had to tell him. I went to his office. I knocked. He said, "Come in." I came in and I stood in front of his desk and I explained the situation with the precision of someone who has learned that delivering bad news clearly is less painful than delivering it with excessive apology wrapped around it. He listened, he looked at his calendar, he said, "Move the council liaison to 4 p.m. and tell him it's my preference, not a conflict." He'll respond better to that framing. That was it. I waited for something else. Nothing came. He was already looking back at the document he'd been reading before I knocked. I started. I should have caught it earlier, I'm sorry. He looked up, not with irritation, with something closer to curiosity. You caught it 3 hours before the conflict. That's well within the correction window. What exactly are you apologizing for? I opened my mouth, closed it. I didn't have a clean answer because the honest answer was, I'm apologizing because in every previous version of my life, a mistake required payment of some kind, and I'm waiting for the invoice. Habit, I said instead. Something moved in his expression, the compass needle adjusting again. Noted, he said quietly, and then, go move the liaison, you handled this correctly. I left his office and stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand still on the doorframe, recalibrating something internal that didn't have a name yet. The second thing that broke my theory happened 6 weeks in, on a night when the northern cold had moved from uncomfortable to punishing, the kind of temperature where the wind off the harbor found every gap in your clothing with what felt like deliberate malice. I had been working late. A logistics chain for an Interpack shipment had developed a complication that required careful documentation, and I had stayed past 10 p.m. untangling it. When I finally finished, I walked through the compound toward my room and realized the heating in the residential east wing had gone quiet. Maintenance issue? It happened in old buildings. I went to find a blanket, found that mine was insufficient for the actual temperature, and was standing in my room in my coat, looking at my succulent on the windowsill with a kind of bleak solidarity. We were both surviving in conditions that were not designed for us, when there was a knock at my door. It was Rennick. He was holding a blanket, a large one, heavy, the kind that means something in terms of the quality of sleep it enables. He held it out, not ceremonially, just practically the way you hand someone a tool they clearly need. Heating engineer is arriving at 6 a.m., he said. Until then, the West Wing common room has the backup system running. You can work there, or there's a couch in my office suite if you need to sleep. He paused. Or take this and stay here if you prefer your own space. I understand the preference. The last sentence? That was the one that caught me. I understand the preference, not assumed, not decided for me, just acknowledged and options given. I took the blanket. It was warm from where he'd been carrying it. Thank you, I said. I'll stay here. He nodded, turned to go, then stopped half in the hallway looking at my windowsill, at the succulent. Does it need more light? He asked. I can have the window fitting adjusted to maximize winter sun. I stared at him. It's a how worthy, he continued, with the tone of someone sharing a logistical detail. They prefer indirect light, but they struggle in northern winters. The window fitting is adjustable. You know succulent varieties. My mother grew them. He said it flatly like a fact in a report. Then, sleep well, Caspian. He left. I stood in my cold room with a warm blanket and looked at my plant and thought, this is not the arrangement I was told I was entering. I should tell you about Fennec. Fennec Orville had been with the Meridian for 4 years. He was a beta mid-30s, with the kind of face that seemed engineered for trustworthiness. Open, warm, the sort of person you told things to before you'd made a conscious decision to trust them. He ran external communications, which meant he was often in adjacent spaces to mine, and he had taken an early and genuine interest in making me feel welcome in a way that I had initially found disarming and later found simply true. He brought coffee to my desk without being asked, because he'd noticed I arrived early and the kitchen wasn't active yet. He explained the compound's internal shorthand, the way different departments communicated, which leads could be approached directly, and which required specific protocols, not because I'd asked, but because he seemed to operate from the principle that information withheld from someone who needed it was a kind of theft. He was, in short, the first person I had allowed myself to think of as a friend since I was 17. On a Tuesday afternoon in my second month, we were in the document room sorting a filing backlog when he said, without preamble, he checks on you. I looked up Rennick. Yes, Fennec continued sorting, his tone neutral, informational. He asks me how you're settling in, not in a surveillance way. He paused, searching, a concerned way, careful, like he doesn't want to ask you directly because he's worried it would feel like pressure. I considered the filing in my hands. He's conscientious about the power differential. He is, Fennec agreed. He's always been careful about that kind of thing, more than most alphas, more than most people in his position. He glanced at me over a stack of folders. But Caspian, I've worked for him for 4 years. I've watched how he operates in situations involving everyone from pack council officials to the kitchen staff. I have a reasonable baseline for what conscientious looks like in him. He set down his stack. What I'm seeing with you is something different. I put the filing down. Don't, I said. I'm not, he answered gently. I'm just flagging it, because you look at him like you're waiting for the trap and he looks at you like he's hoping you'll eventually stop waiting. The room was quiet except for the ventilation and the distant sounds of the compound doing its daily work. I've been purchased, I said, flat, clear, nomming it plainly. Whatever this looks like, that's the substrate it's built on. Yes, Fennec said. He didn't flinch from it. I respected that. And he knows that too. He knew it before he made the acquisition. That's why he structured the arrangement the way he did. He picked up his filing again. I'm not telling you what to feel about it. I'm just telling you what I see. I didn't respond, but I didn't put the filing down quickly enough to be convincing, and Fennec, who was perceptive in the quiet, steady way of people who listen more than they speak, said nothing further, which was its own kind of answer. The thing about Omega instincts that no one explains to you when you're young, or at least, no one explained to me because I had no one to explain anything, is that they are not a simple system. Popular understanding treats them as a single force, a compass that points you toward compatible alphas and away from danger. The reality is more complicated. Omega instincts are a conversation, multiple biological signals running simultaneously, sometimes contradicting, sometimes reinforcing, always contextual. The signal that reads alpha is well documented. What's less discussed is the signal that reads safe. They are not the same. I had encountered alphas before, pack-adjacent coworkers, the credit union's enforcers, authority figures throughout my working life, and my biology had noted them the way you note weather. Something in the environment requiring calibration, nothing more. What my biology was doing with Rennick Cole was something I had no reference point for. It was not loud, that's the first thing, no flooding warmth, no dramatic pull. It was quiet, insistent, the way a sound is when it's exactly at the threshold of hearing, you keep turning your head to confirm it's real. Every time I was in the same room with him, something in my nervous system took a long, slow breath and went still. Not frozen. Still, the difference between rigidity and rest. I hated it, initially, not because the feeling was bad, but because I didn't trust it. My instincts had never before been in a position to develop opinions about a specific person because I had kept myself carefully away from situations where that was possible. Lone Omega, no pack, no affiliation, head down, move on. That was survival. And now I lived in his house, worked at his direction, and my nervous system was apparently voting without my consultation. I tried treating it clinically, a biological response to prolonged proximity to a high-dominance alpha. Normal, manageable, it didn't require action or acknowledgement. I could note it and file it and continue functioning. This strategy worked adequately until the morning 8 weeks in when I was sitting in his office delivering a briefing on Interpack logistics. And he listened with his full attention the way he always listened, absolutely, with no division of his focus, and then said, "You haven't eaten breakfast." I stopped mid-sentence. What? He didn't look apologetic for the interruption. He looked like he was simply adding a relevant data point to the meeting. Goran mentioned the kitchen was closed early today for a delivery restock. You usually eat before 8, and it's now 9:15. He opened his desk drawer and produced an individually wrapped piece of what appeared to be dense grain bread, the kind that Goran made in batches twice a week and left available in the staff kitchen. "Continue," he said, setting it on the edge of the desk nearest me. I looked at the bread, I looked at him. He had already shifted his attention back to the logistics documents I'd brought. I started, did you keep that in your desk for?" "Goran knew the kitchen would be closed," he said without looking up. "He gave me several, I had one before you arrived, continue with the shipping route analysis." I picked up the bread. I continued the briefing. And something that had been clenched in my chest for 8 weeks, a sustained, careful tension, the physical posture of a person waiting for a situation to reveal its real terms, loosened by a fraction so small it barely registered. But it registered. The situation with the Havern Pack Council arrived at the end of my second month. I should explain the political context, because it matters. The Cole Meridian operated in a complicated relationship with the Havern Pack, not as a subordinate entity, because Rennick acknowledged pack structure only insofar as it was legally necessary and strategically useful, which gave him an unusual degree of independence that the Pack Council found perennially irritating. The council operated under a senior alpha named Valcourt, who had held his position for 12 years and who regarded the Cole Meridian with the particular hostility of someone who resents what they cannot control. Valcourt had made several attempts over the years to extend Pack Council jurisdiction over the Meridian's operations. All had been deflected legally, precisely, without drama. This was, I had learned, Rennick's signature. He did not meet force with force. He met it with preparation, with legal architecture, with structures so well constructed that by the time a challenge arrived, it found no purchase. What Valcourt tried on a Wednesday morning in my 9th week was not a legal challenge. It was personal. He sent a representative to the compound, a pack official named Dressed, mid-50s, the embodiment of institutional authority dressed in pack regalia. I was in the entrance hall reviewing delivery manifests when Dressed arrived. Sable had not been informed of the visit, which was itself a provocation, an assertion that pack officials required no appointment. Dressed looked at me. Alphas sometimes do something with their eyes when they're registering Omega presence, not all of them, not always, and the good ones have the decency to either not do it or mask it completely. What Dressed did was not masked. It was a slow assessment top to bottom, the kind that treats another person as inventory. Then his eyes went to my neck, specifically to the unmarked skin there. Unclaimed, registered, noted. "I'm here to see Cole," he said, not to me specifically, at the general air in front of him. "Mr. Cole doesn't receive unscheduled visitors," I said. My voice came out steady, which was a small victory because my Omega instincts had read Dressed energy and were currently running a full threat assessment. "If you'd like to schedule." "I'm a pack official," Dressed said, and his voice carried the comfortable authority of someone who had never been told no by someone they considered beneath them. "I don't schedule." "You do at this compound," I said. "I can offer you Thursday." "Step aside," he moved forward. I did not step aside. I'm not entirely sure why. The sensible response, the survival-trained response, was to step aside, to escalate to Rennick, to let the institutional structures handle the institutional problem. But something in Dressed's assessment, in that inventory look, in the way his eyes had moved to my neck with such practiced entitlement, had activated something in me that was less Omega instinct and more older than that. The part of me that had kept 2 jobs in a northern winter and eaten rice so long I'd lost my taste for anything else, and had not once asked anyone to feel sorry about it. I stood where I was, like this video, and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. "I'll let Mr. Cole know you're here," I said. "Please wait." Dressed's expression shifted into something that recognized an obstacle. Then I heard footsteps behind me, and the air in the entrance hall changed. That subtle barometric shift that happens when Rennick Cole enters a space, pressure redistributing without announcement. "Dressed," Rennick's voice came from behind my left shoulder. Even, calm, "This is unexpected." Dressed's posture reorganized itself. Even he, I noted, was not immune to whatever Rennick projected. "Cole, I have business from the council." "Bring it to my office." Rennick stepped past me, then paused, half turning, and said quietly enough that Dressed couldn't hear, "Well done." 2 words, that was all. Then he walked Dressed down the hallway without another backward glance. I stood in the entrance hall for a moment. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. My instincts were still running their threat calculation, but underneath it, underneath the elevated alertness and the residual tension from Dressed's assessment, there was something else. Something that felt like being seen. Again, that specific and unexpected feeling of mattering in a space. I looked down at my delivery manifests. I went back to work, but I filed the moment somewhere that wasn't professional. I learned what Dressed had actually come for from Fennec 2 days later. He came with a proposal, Fennec told me. We were in the document room again, which had become our default location for conversations that required walls. "From the council, formalized in pack language, which makes it official." He paused. "They're proposing that as a condition of extending the Meridian's operating charter, which comes up for review in 3 months, Rennick enter a formal pack bond with a council-approved Omega." I heard the words, I arranged them into meaning. They want to choose a mate for him. They want control over who his mate is. Yes, because a bonded alpha with a pack-approved Omega has obligations. It creates leverage. Valcourt has been trying to get leverage over Rennick for years, and this is the most legally sophisticated attempt yet. Fennec looked at me carefully. The Omega they've proposed is from the Valcourt family, a cousin, I believe. The document room was quiet. What did Rennick say? I asked. He declined, calmly, with extensive legal documentation explaining why the proposal fell outside the council's jurisdictional authority over the Meridian. Fennec continued, steady. But Caspian Drest also submitted, as part of the formal council record, a notation about the Meridian's current bond-adjacent claim. My chest tightened. About me. About you. Specifically, the suggestion that an unbonded Omega under a bond-adjacent claim living within the compound represented an undisclosed entanglement, their language, that the council had standing to review. I understood the architecture of this. I was being used as leverage from the opposite direction. If the council could characterize my presence as a compromising entanglement, they could require disclosure, review, interference. It was elegant in the way that predatory things are sometimes elegant. He's going to have to release the claim, I said. It came out flat, analytical. The voice I used when I was keeping the other version of my voice from getting involved. To remove the council's standing to review it, he'll need to formally clear the debt and end the bond-adjacent relationship. Fennec was quiet for a moment. That's one solution, yes. It's the logical one. It is, he set down his work. Caspian, how are you with that, with the prospect of leaving? I looked at my hands on the filing, at the manifests I'd organized, at the small, careful world of competence I'd built in 9 weeks inside these walls. I thought about bread kept in a desk drawer, about a south-facing window adjusted for winter light, about the specific quality of a room when someone gives you their complete attention. I'm fine, I said. I was not fine, but the shape of what I actually was hadn't finished forming yet, and I wasn't ready to look at it directly. Rennick called me to his office that evening. He was standing when I arrived, not seated at his desk, standing at the window, looking at the winter garden in the dark, lit only by the compound's exterior lights. The bare trees, the structural bones of something that would be different in another season. He turned when I came in. He looked at me with that direct patience, that quality of seeing without demanding. Sit down, he said, please. I sat. He moved to the chair across from me, not behind the desk. That was a choice, I noted it. You're aware of the council's submission, he said, not a question. Information traveled in the compound and he knew it. Yes. I want to be clear with you about something. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the posture of someone who wants to reduce the distance their words have to travel. The bond-adjacent claim was always a mechanism, a legal tool I used to remove you from the credit union's reach. It was never meant to be, he paused, selecting, a definition of what this is. What is this? I asked. It came out quieter than I intended. He held my gaze. That, he said slowly, is something I'd like to be careful about. Careful? You came here under circumstances that compromised your ability to refuse. I'm aware of that. I've been aware of it every day since you arrived. Which means anything that might, another pause longer, anything that might be developing on my side of this requires extraordinary care. Because I don't want you to feel it as pressure. I don't want you to make decisions based on obligation rather than choice. The room was very quiet. Outside, the winter garden sat in its dark bones. You're telling me, I said carefully, that something is developing on your side. He held the eye contact and did not retreat from it. Yes, he said simply. One word, it landed in my chest and stayed there, warm and terrifying. The council's submission, I began, is not your problem to solve, he said. I want to be explicit about that. You are not a liability, you are not leverage, you are not a complication in my political situation. His jaw set slightly. You are Caspian. You arrived here with a plant in a dish towel, and you rebuilt your entire professional operation in 9 weeks from nothing. And you stood in my entrance hall and declined to step aside for a PAC official who has never been told no by anyone, and you are not going to be treated as a piece on someone else's board. Not by the council, not by Valcourt, and not by me. I did not trust my voice for a moment. I let the moment pass. The formal debt, I finally said, if you clear it. The debt is already cleared, he said it simply. I instructed the legal team to finalize it this afternoon. You have no financial obligation to me. The bond-adjacent claim is formally dissolved. I stared at him, you without telling me. I'm telling you now, he met my eyes steadily. You are free, Caspian, completely. Your employment here continues on its own terms, your contract, your salary, nothing else. If you want to leave, you leave. If you want to stay, you stay. The choice is entirely yours. He paused. It always should have been. I'm sorry it took this long to make that structural. The winter garden sat in the dark outside. I thought about 9 weeks of rectangular attention, of bread in a desk drawer, of a window adjusted for a plant I'd carried in a dish towel because it was the only living thing I'd managed to keep through everything. I thought about what Fennec had said. He looks at you like he's hopping, you'll eventually stop waiting. I'm not leaving, I said. Something in Rennick Cole's face shifted. Not dramatically, just a small, quiet change, like a tension he'd been carrying for 9 weeks releasing by a fraction so small it barely registered. But it registered. The morning after Rennick told me the debt was cleared, I woke up and lay in my bed for a long time before getting up. This sounds simple. It was not simple. For 5 years, since I was 17 and working 2 jobs in a city that treated unclaimed Omegas like background weather, I had woken up every morning with the immediate, functional urgency of someone who cannot afford to lie still. The calculus of survival runs first thing. What needs doing? What can be deferred? What is the minimum expenditure of resources required to get through today intact? Lying still felt like a luxury the budget didn't support. That morning I lay still. Not because I had nothing to do. I had a full schedule, a logistics review, 2 inter-department briefings, a shipment documentation issue that had been sitting in my queue since Tuesday. The work existed. The urgency did not arrive with it. I looked at the ceiling. I looked at my succulent on the south-facing windowsill, catching what thin northern light February was willing to offer. I thought, I am not owned by anything in this room. Not the debt, not the claim, not the careful legal architecture that had brought me here. Just the job, the choice. The work I was actually good at in a place that had not yet revealed the false bottom I'd been waiting for. It hadn't revealed it because there wasn't one. I was still working out what to do with that. The political situation with Valcourt and the council did not resolve quietly. I should have expected that. Men who build leverage-based power structures do not accept the removal of their leverage without escalation. Valcourt's next move arrived 2 weeks after the bond-adjacent dissolution, and it was not subtle. He filed a formal PAC Council review of the Meridian's operational charter 3 months ahead of the scheduled renewal. The grounds were technical, procedural, the kind of language that sounds administrative, until you read it carefully and understand that it was designed to create a 6-month window of uncertainty, during which the Meridian's contracts, partnerships, and external relationships would all be operating under a cloud of potential dissolution. Merrick, no, wait, I keep reaching for the names from a different story. These are not the Morgan brothers. Let me tell you who was actually in that room when Rennick laid out the situation. Fennec was there because Fennec was always in the rooms where information lived. Sable was there, which surprised me at first. I had categorized her as a driver, a transport function, until I understood that Sable ran the Meridian's external intelligence network and had been doing so for 7 years, and the driving was something she did when she wanted to think. And there was a third person I hadn't encountered extensively before, a man named Wren. Wren was the Meridian's legal architect. He was a beta, perhaps 40, lean and angular with the kind of face that seemed designed to make opposing legal counsel underestimate him before he systematically dismantled their position. He spoke rarely in meetings, and precisely when he did, every sentence carrying the density of someone who had edited out everything non-essential before opening his mouth. And me, I was in the room because Rennick had asked me to be there, and the asking had been direct and without elaboration. I'd like you at the charter review briefing. Bring your logistics documentation from the last quarter. I had brought it. Wren laid out the situation. The council's filing created a review window during which the Meridian was technically operating under provisional charter. This had no immediate operational impact, but it created reputational uncertainty that could affect external partnerships. Specifically, 3 interpact trade agreements currently in negotiation that required the Meridian's charter status to be confirmed and stable. Valcourt knows about the trade agreements, Sable noted. Her voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of someone who has already calculated 3 moves past the current one. The timing of this filing is not coincidental. No, Rennick agreed. He was standing at the window again. He did that when he was working through something, positioned himself where he could see the grounds, the trees, the structural reality of the physical world, as if it helped him hold the structural reality of whatever problem he was solving. He wants us on the back foot during the negotiation window. A provisional charter weakens our position. Can we accelerate the negotiations? Fennec asked. Partially, Wren replied. The Eastern Agreement can be moved forward. The Northern one requires the Pack Council's co-signature, which Valcourt will delay as long as the review is open. He paused. There is a third option. The room waited. Counterfiling, Wren said. We submit our own review request, a review of the Council's jurisdictional authority to initiate charter reviews for non-Pack member entities. It's never been tested legally. The Meridian's charter predates several of the Council's current jurisdictional statutes. If the review proceeds to a formal arbitration body, rather than staying within Pack Council authority, we remove Valcourt from the adjudication entirely. Silence, then Sable said, How long does that take? Longer than we'd like, Wren admitted. But it changes the terrain. We stop defending and start asking questions they'd rather not answer. Rennick turned from the window. His eyes moved across the room, touching each person briefly and then settled on me. Caspian, the logistics documentation. I laid it out. 3 months of shipping records, contract fulfillment rates, partner communications, all the numerical evidence that the Meridian's operational reality bore no resemblance to the undisclosed entanglement and operational irregularities the Council's filing had vaguely gestured at. Solid numbers. Clean records. The kind of documentation that had come from 9 weeks of someone doing their job correctly. Wren looked at it carefully, then he looked at Rennick. This helps, he said, which from Wren I was learning was the equivalent of someone else saying this is excellent. After the briefing, when the others had gone, I stayed to collect my documentation. Rennick was still in the room, standing now at the center of it rather than the window, looking at the table where the papers had been spread. Thank you, he said. It's my job, I answered. Then, because I was trying to be braver about certain things, though I'm glad it was useful for something larger than shipping manifests. Something in his expression did the thing I was beginning to recognize, that small, precise movement, the compass needle. It was more than useful. He paused. Can I ask you something? I looked up, yes. When Dressed came, when you didn't step aside, he was watching me carefully. Were you afraid? I thought about it honestly. My instincts were running threat assessment, yes. But you didn't move. No. Why? I considered the question the way it deserved to be considered, which was seriously and without the deflection I would have offered 3 months ago. Because he looked at me like I was a door, I said, and I am not a door. Rennick held my gaze for a long moment, then he said quietly, No, you are not. He left first. I stood in the briefing room for a moment with my documentation and thought, something is happening. And unlike every other time in my life when something was happening, and things had always been happening to me, financial things, social things, the inexorable grinding mechanics of a life lived without margin. This time the something did not feel like approaching damage. It felt like approaching weather, the good kind, the kind that breaks a drought. The counterfiling strategy created a 3-month legal suspension during which the charter review was moved to interpack arbitration. This was, from Valcourt's perspective, a disaster. He had designed his filing to operate within Pack Council structures where he controlled the process. In arbitration, he was simply one party among several. During those 3 months, the Meridian ran. I ran with it. My role had expanded naturally, the way work expands when you do it well and the person directing you trusts your judgment. I was handling external partner communications directly, not just internally facing scheduling. I had taken on oversight of the documentation systems for the trade agreement negotiations. I was in more briefings, more rooms, more conversations. And I was in more spaces with Rennick. This was the most significant shift, and I want to describe it accurately because the inaccurate description would be easier but wrong. It was not a romance unfolding. Not in the conventional sense, not with the dramatic architecture of revelation scenes and declarations. It was something quieter and more structural. Like the meridian itself, it ran on the daily accumulation of small precisions. He remembered things. That was the first layer. He remembered that I took my coffee without anything added, and that I shifted to tea after 3 p.m. or my sleep fractured, and that I found unnecessary meetings physically painful in a way that probably had more to do with having spent years with no wasted time than any personal failing. He remembered that the succulent on my windowsill was named. I had named it quietly without telling anyone, and then Sable had found out and told Fennec, and Fennec had told Rennick because information in the meridian traveled with its own momentum. Caster. After a star. Because it was the thing in my room that reliably oriented me. One morning I arrived at my desk to find a small card. Castor looked like he needed company. R. Beside the card was a second succulent. A different variety, slightly larger with a rosette structure that complemented Castor's upright form, perfectly matched for a south-facing winter window. I sat at my desk for a moment before starting work. Then I sent him a message, "You named yours yet?" His reply came in 4 minutes, open to suggestions. I thought about it for the rest of the morning. At lunch I sent Pollux. His reply, obviously. I stared at my screen for a moment. Then I put my phone down and got back to work and quietly, carefully, allowed something to exist in my chest that I had not allowed anything to occupy in a very long time. The thing about Omega instincts that I mentioned before, the conversation that runs beneath conscious thought, the signals that read alpha and safe as distinct categories, I want to return to that, because in my 4th month something happened to those signals. They stopped being separate. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual enough that I almost missed it, the way you miss incremental change in something you see every day. The way winter becomes spring not in a single moment, but through the accumulation of degrees, each one individually unnoticeable until one morning you look at the bare trees and there is something green in them that was not there yesterday. The signal that read alpha when Rennick entered a room had always been there, factual and biological. The signal that read safe had developed slowly over 4 months of bread in desk drawers and windows adjusted for plants, and the steady, undemanding quality of his attention. And then, on an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon when I was sitting across from him reviewing arbitration documentation, and he reached across the table to point at a clause I'd flagged, and his hand was 6 inches from mine on the table, and my nervous system took that long, slow breath and went still. The two signals were the same signal. I looked at the clause. I said something coherent about its implications. I kept my face professional and my voice even. But internally I was doing the Omega equivalent of standing very still in a clearing and realizing that what I'd thought was 2 separate things was always one thing, and the understanding of it changed the shape of everything. That night I went to Fennec's office. He looked up from his screen and read whatever was on my face with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this visit. "Sit down," he said. I sat. "This is a problem," I told him. "Is it?" "He's my employer, he was my creditor, the power differential. Which he has been meticulously, exhaustingly careful about since the day you arrived," Fennec said. "Yes, I've watched him be careful about it for 4 months. It's been honestly somewhat extraordinary to observe." He leaned back in his chair. "Caspian, what exactly is the problem you're describing?" I looked at my hands. "I don't want to feel this because he's obligated to be kind to me. I don't want to feel it because my instincts are responding to prolonged proximity to a high dominance alpha. I want to feel it." I stopped. "Because," Fennec prompted, gentle. "Because it's real," I said. "Because he's real. Because it's actually him, not the situation, not the biology, not the power structure, him specifically." I looked up, and I don't know how to know the difference. Fennec was quiet for a moment. Outside his window, the compound was doing its evening routine, lights shifting, security rotation, the ordinary domestic mechanics of a place where people lived and worked. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Please." 4 months ago, before you arrived, Rennick Cole was functional. He's always functional, that's not a variable. But there's functional and then there's present, and for a long time before you came here, he was the former without much of the latter. Not dramatically. He doesn't do dramatic. Fennec's voice was careful, not unkind. He ran everything well. He managed the meridian's complexity with the same precision he always had. He just did it from a certain distance from his own life. I looked at him. The bread in the desk drawer, Fennec continued. Caspian, that started on your third day. I know because Goran told me, because Rennick asked Goran to set aside food for your early mornings before you'd been here long enough for anyone to establish whether you had dietary preferences, or whether you were staying, or whether this arrangement was going to be what it became. He met my eyes. He decided to pay attention to you before he had any rational basis for doing so. That's not obligation. That's not the power structure, that's something considerably more specific. I sat with that for a long time. What do I do with it? I asked. I think, Fennec said carefully, that you might consider telling him what you just told me. I did not tell him immediately. I want to be accurate about that because this is not a story where realizations translate immediately into action, where the internal and external move at the same pace. That's not how it worked for me. 5 years of survival mode wiring does not rewire in an evening, and I had learned, the hard way, repeatedly, that acting on feeling before thinking through the structural implications of that action was how people like me ended up in positions we couldn't exit cleanly. So I thought. For 2 weeks I thought, while the arbitration progressed and the trade agreements moved forward and the compound ran its daily rhythms and Castor and Pollux grew incrementally on my windowsill in the accumulating spring light. I thought about what Rennick had said. I don't want you to make decisions based on obligation rather than choice. I thought about what Fennec had said. He decided to pay attention to you before he had any rational basis for doing so. I thought about what my own instincts had been trying to tell me for 4 months in their patient, persistent way. I thought about what I wanted, which was itself a new practice, the deliberate asking of that question without immediately editing the answer for feasibility. What I wanted was specific. Not the abstract comfort of being cared for. I had grown suspicious of that abstraction, knowing how easily it could be performed. I wanted him. The particular quality of his attention. The way he moved through a room like he'd already mapped it. The bread in the drawer and the plant on the windowsill and the word obviously sent in response to Pollux and the line of his jaw when he was working through a problem at the window. The way he had said you are not a door like it was important information that needed to be on record. Specific, irreducible, not the situation, him. Once I had that clearly, the thinking part was mostly done. It was a Sunday. The compound was quieter on Sundays, a different rhythm, the operational machinery running at lower pitch, people moving through the spaces with the particular unhurried quality of a day that wasn't asking much of them. I found Rennick in the library, not his office. The compound had a proper library, 2 walls of books in a room with old, comfortable chairs and light that came from a series of low windows positioned to catch the afternoon sun. He was in one of the chairs, reading, physical book, paper, marker. He looked up when I came in. Caspian, no surprise in his voice, or rather the kind of non-surprise that is itself a form of information. I sat in the chair across from him. The afternoon light was doing something particular to the room, spring light now, softer than winter, the kind that makes everything look like it's been there a long time and belongs. I want to talk about something, I said. And I need you to let me finish before you respond, because if you respond before I'm done, I'll lose the thread, and it took me 2 weeks to find it. He set his book down, he gave me his full attention. Of course he did, he always did. I talked. I told him what I'd told Fennec, and then I told him what I hadn't told Fennec, the specific shape of it, the irreducibility of it, the fact that I had spent 4 months waiting to find the false bottom and there wasn't one, and I was not someone who trusted easily or often or without extensive evidence, and I had extensive evidence. I told him about the 2 signals becoming one. I told him that I understood the structural complications, the history, the claim, the power differential, and that I was not dismissing them, but that I had thought carefully about whether those structures were generating the feeling or whether the feeling existed independently of them, and I had concluded it was the latter. I told him I was not asking for anything. I was telling him something true because the compound ran on not withholding relevant information from the people who needed it, and this was information he needed. Then I stopped talking. The library was quiet. The afternoon light moved slightly as clouds shifted outside. Rennick looked at me for a long moment, the compass needle, north. Then he said, I have been careful. I know, I said. I have been careful because I was aware of every dimension of this situation that made acting on what he paused. on what I have been feeling since approximately your third week, inadvisable. Structurally, ethically. He held my gaze. I had decided that the appropriate course was to remove every structural complication first and then, if you were still here, if you had chosen to stay without any obligation remaining, to consider whether I had standing to say anything. The debt clearance, I said. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. And your continued presence after that, which told me something. But I wasn't certain what it told me because I was aware that you might stay for reasons that had nothing to do with another pause, with what I wanted it to mean. I stayed for reasons that had everything to do with what you wanted it to mean, I said. I just needed 2 more weeks to be sure. The afternoon light, the books on their shelves, Pollux probably sitting in the light of my south-facing window 2 hallways away. Rennick exhaled just once, the controlled release of something held a long time. Caspian, he said. Yes. Can I cross the room? The question, the asking, the fact that after everything, his position, his authority, the full weight of what he was in every room he occupied, he still asked. Yes, I said. He crossed the room. He sat on the arm of my chair, which put him close but not overwhelming, near but with space still available between us, all of it calibrated with the same precision he brought to everything. He looked at me at close range for a moment. Then he said, I've been trying to work out since about week 3 what I would say if this conversation ever happened. What did you come up with? Nothing adequate, a pause. I made you a plan instead. I looked at him, he looked at me. And then I laughed, not the careful measured version of a laugh, but the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below the managed surface of things, rough and genuine and surprised by itself. Rennick's face did something I had not seen it do before. Full, not the small compass needle adjustment, not the carefully maintained equilibrium of a man who has run an empire since he was 26. Something complete and unguarded. There, he said quietly, almost to himself, there it is. If you are not subscribed yet now, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. Let's back to the story. The arbitration concluded 6 weeks later. The Interpac arbitration body ruled that the Council's jurisdictional authority to initiate charter reviews for non-member entities required specific grounds that Valcourt's filing had failed to establish. The Meridian's charter was confirmed without review. The 3 trade agreements were finalized. Valcourt filed a formal objection to the arbitration ruling, which Wren had anticipated and pre-addressed with a secondary legal structure so comprehensive that the objection was dismissed in 11 days. The day the final confirmation came through, I was in Rennick's office when Wren delivered the news. Wren said, "It's done," in his precise, uninflected way and left. Fennick, who had been in the doorway, smiled once and followed him. Rennick and I were alone in the office. "It's done," I repeated, different from Wren's delivery of the same words, testing how it felt. "Yes," he was looking at me, not at the documentation. "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. I thought about a year ago, not even a year, 8 months, standing in my apartment with an enforcer's assessment still hanging in the air, and the knowledge that my debt had been purchased by the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. I thought about the car at 6:58 a.m., and the plant and the dish towel and the south-facing window and bread in a desk drawer and obviously, and the library on a Sunday afternoon and everything that had accumulated between those points. Like something that was very tight, I said, has been loose for a while and I've only just noticed. He looked at me with that full, unguarded thing that I was slowly learning was mine to keep. The formal bond conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in what had become, over months, simply our routine, work done, compound settling into its nighttime pace, the library with its low light and the 2 chairs that had been gradually moving closer together without either of us formally acknowledging the movement. I brought it up because I had learned that I could bring things up. That was still new enough to feel like something worth nodding. "I want to talk about the bond," I said. Rennick looked up from his book. He set it down. He waited with his complete attention, the way he always waited, no acceleration, no filling the space before I was ready to fill it. "I know it's not simple," I started. "Given all of it, the history of how I came here, the instinct question whether what I'm feeling is real versus biological response. I've thought about all of those dimensions." And he said quiet. "And I've landed in the same place every time." I looked at him directly. "My instincts didn't create this. They recognize something that was already structurally true, which is that you are specifically the person I want to be specifically bonded to. Not because of proximity, not because of obligation, not because you're an alpha and I'm an omega and there's biology doing its work in the background. I paused. Because you kept bread in a drawer for someone you'd known 3 days, and you asked permission to cross a room, and you made me a plant because you couldn't find words, and you have been careful with me in a way that took genuine effort, and I know it took effort because I've watched you, and I know the difference between what comes naturally to you and what you do with intention. The library was quiet. The formal bond, I continued. I'm not in a rush about the physical aspects of it. I want to be honest about that. I carry some wariness in my body around things that are permanent and physical, given what the credit union's architecture was designed to become. I need to move at my own pace. Yes, he said immediately, no hesitation, no condition. But I want to stop operating as though this is a question, I told him. I want to be here because I am here. I want the bond to mean what it actually means, which is a choice made with full information and without any remaining obligation structuring it. I held his gaze. I choose this, I choose you. Rennick was quiet for a moment. I had learned to value his silences. They were not empty, they were where he did his most honest thinking, and what came out of them was always true. You came here, he said slowly, in a dish towel with a plant. I did. And you have reorganized this entire compound's operational efficiency by approximately 40%, and you have made Ren say the words, "This is good work," on 2 separate occasions, which I want you to understand as a historic achievement. He paused. And you have made this place, he stopped. His jaw worked slightly, the way it did when he was selecting with great care. You have made this place feel like somewhere I actually live, rather than somewhere I operate from. I looked at him. I have been ready, he said quietly, since about week 6. I have been waiting for you to be ready, which I would have done indefinitely, without complaint, because that's what you do when something matters. He reached across and his hand covered mine on the armrest, warm and deliberate, the asking done in advance and both of us knowing it. I choose you too, Caspian. I chose you before I had any logical basis to. I've been choosing you every day since. The spring evening settled around us. Somewhere in my room, Castor and Pollux sat in the darkening light of a south-facing window, 2 small growing things in a place that had learned to hold them. The bond formed 3 months after that conversation, slow and chosen and nothing like anything I had been afraid it would be. No force, no demand, no invasion. It came the way the garden came back after winter, through accumulated warmth, through daily tending, through the patient faith that roots survive even what they cannot see the end of. What I can tell you about the bond, about what it actually felt like when it settled, it felt like the window adjustment. It felt like someone looking at what you need and making a quiet, undramatic change so that you can grow better. It felt like being seen with the lights on and having the person who sees you decide deliberately to stay. I kept the succulent, both of them Castor and Pollux, on the windowsill, 2 different varieties grown together in the particular light of a north-facing compound on an elevated shelf above a harbor city reaching. They were not the same plant. They had different structures, different needs, slightly different responses to light. But they had been chosen for the same window, tended by the same hands, and they had adapted to share the space in ways neither of them could have managed alone. I thought that was a reasonable metaphor. Rennick, when I told him this, said it was a remarkable metaphor and also that I was projecting on the succulents. I told him the succulents could handle it. He said obviously. There is a particular quality that comes with a life that has stopped being organized around survival. I don't have a clean word for it. It isn't happiness exactly, though it is that. It's something more structural than happiness, something in the foundation rather than the surface. The sense that the ground under you is real, tested, yours, that you can put weight on it and it will hold. I had not had that before. I had had good days inside a fundamentally precarious arrangement, flashes of warmth in drafty apartments, moments of genuine feeling in a life that was mostly logistics. I had been competent and functional and quietly, thoroughly alone. And then I had been delivered by a debt into a compound on an elevated shelf above a harbor, with a plant and a dish towel and nothing else that mattered. And I had found not what I was looking for because I had stopped looking, because looking felt like a luxury the budget didn't support, but what was already there, already structurally present, waiting with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time and was prepared to wait longer. Rennick Cole, who asked permission to cross a room, who learned the name of a star so a succulent could have a companion, who built a legal architecture to remove me from someone else's claim before he had any basis for believing I would ever matter to him, because the possibility that I might was sufficient reason for the care. I had told him once, I am not a door. He had said, no, you are not. Like this video and subscribe this Chanel. Let's back to the story. And he had spent every day since treating that not as a courtesy or a concession but as a fact about the world. Fixed, structural, not up for review. This is what I learned, in the end, after all the debt and the cold winters and the survival arithmetic and the long practice of expecting nothing so that nothing could be taken. The right person does not ask you to make yourself smaller to fit. They adjust the window. They make room. They bring a plant to keep yours company and leave it without ceremony because the gesture is not about recognition. It is just about the fact that you needed something and they had it, and giving it to you was the obvious thing to do. My name is Caspian Voss. I am an Omega, bonded to an Alpha who runs the Northern Territories and keeps bread in his desk drawer and has never once asked me to step aside. I have a south-facing window and 2 succulents and a job that is mine and a choice that is mine and a life that has stopped being organized around not losing things. And if you ask me now, standing in this compound in the spring light with the harbor visible below and Rennick's voice coming from the kitchen 2 rooms away, whether it was worth it, the debt, the cold, the long arithmetic of surviving without margin, I would tell you what I have come to understand about worth. It is not a calculation. It is not what you endure divided by what you receive. It is what you find when you finally stop running the numbers and look up and see that someone has been quietly, patiently, making room for you to arrive. I arrived. That was enough, that was everything.